Hello, I'm Dan with Orbital Guitars, and over the next 15 minutes, let me show you how I made this guitar. Alright, so we're going to begin with a little taste of the demo, and then we'll get right on into the build. So beginning the build by starting to cut out the shape of the neck from this piece of roasted flame maple. Now gluing on the Cocobolo fretboard. Cutting the fret slots by hand. Guitar has 24 frets and has a 25-inch scale length. Once frets are cut, I'm going to sand in the radius using a radius block to put in a 12-inch fretboard radius. After installing the frets, I'm going to glue on a piece of Macassar Ebony that matches the top of the body for a veneer on the front of the headstock. Once that's on there, I'm going to begin carving in an inlay in the headstock. Normally I would do this on the fretboard, but because of a certain grain pattern on the fretboard around the 12th fret that I didn't want to obscure with an inlay, I did it on the headstock instead. And this inlay is made with some gold flake inlay powder and some crushed opal. Then sanded back to a nice shiny finish. After I've done that, I'm going to carve the shape of the neck by hand with a saw rasp. Then various sanding methods to remove all of the gouges left by the saw rasp and various other rasps that I used. Now installing the side dots. I'm going to drill out some holes in all the appropriate places, and then I'm also going to fill these with the same metallic gold flake and opal that I used for the inlay on the headstock. After the super glue is cured, I'm going to level it all off with a file and then sand it smooth with some sandpaper. Moving on to the body, I'm going to start by cutting out the shape of the body from the top. This allows me to preserve enough of the material from the top to make the headstock veneer. Now gluing the top onto the swamp ash body. There are some cracks in the wood for the top, but rather than filling them with wood dust and glue, which would have just looked like more wood, I decided to fill them with some more of the gold flake inlay powder to give this appearance of gold mineral streaks embedded into the wood itself. It's subtle, but visible. Now onto a lot of the bulk work on the body that has to be done on every guitar, cutting out a neck pocket, routing out cavities for the flight rows. Front and back. Using a drill press with a Forstner bit, going to remove the bulk of the material for the control cavity, and then route it into its final shape. And of course, routing for the pickup cavities. Moving on to some back plates, I'm using some of the offcut material from the roasted flame maple neck. I felt like this would tie in the look of the back of the guitar better than trying to salvage enough material from the top of the body to make these plates. Now the back plates and the back of the neck match because they're made from the same material. Well, the top was not thick enough to carve, so I'm going to just put in a nice bevel all the way around on the front and back. It's simple and tasteful. And then once all of that work on the body is done, I'm ready to glue in the neck. After the glue is dry, I'm going to carve in a transition between the neck and the body. Moving the bulk of the material with an angle grinder, following it up with some rasps and files, and then sanding it all smooth. And I did this deliberately because I wanted to have a really smooth transition here between the neck and the body that would feel almost like a neck through guitar would. Now here, doing a bit of an experimental finish on the back of the body, I'm starting by carefully burning only the grain lines in the ash, scraping out the charred material with a wire brush, and then sanding the whole thing up to 320 grit. This process opens up the softer parts of the wood grain. Now after I do that, I'm going to stain the whole back of the guitar with black wood stain, and then I'm going to fill in the open grain, or rather paint in the open grain with some gold enamel modeling paint. And I say paint in rather than fill because it gives a different look. If it was totally filled, then the back of the guitar would have a totally smooth texture and you wouldn't still have this look of grain lines, it would just look like flat lines. Painting it in, you still get a textured feel and you get to see the wood grain even with the gold paint in there. And once all of that is done, I'm going to apply the lacquer finish. And of course, after the lacquer is fully cured, I'm going to sand it down using 1000 up to 1500 grit sandpaper. And once that's as smooth as I want it to be, I'm going to use some buffing compounds to remove any scratches that were left from the sandpaper and then give it its ultimate polish. Make it nice, smooth, and shiny. So then I want to make a smooth transition here. You can see there's a sharp line between lacquer and raw wood on the neck, which I didn't want, so I'm taking some 320 grit sandpaper and sanding back the lacquer until it's a smooth transition, and then once I've done that, I can apply the oil finish to the neck. This is going to allow the neck to have a nice, very smooth satin feel rather than sticky lacquer, while still having the body lacquered and no noticeable transition between the two. Now I'm beginning to install the hardware. Got some burnt chrome tuners. The Cold Sweat humbucker set from Bare Knuckle Pickups, also with burnt chrome covers and black screws. They look very nice, and this camera angle does not do them justice. After the wiring's done, putting on the back plates, which I think look fantastic with that finish I did on the back. And of course putting in the locking nut. Putting in the pegs for the Floyd Rose. Installing the bridge itself with the springs. Putting on the knobs. Also burnt chrome, of course. Everything had to match, except for the things that couldn't match. We'll get to those later. Putting on the string bar on the headstock. And the other back plate. And then installing strap locks. Now the strap locks are regular gold, because I couldn't get those in burnt chrome. Went with gold instead because that would match the paint and the inlays and the top and the headstock. And that does it for the build. So there you have it. That was the making of my entry into the Great Guitar Build-Off 2021. All that's left now is for me to hand this over to a friend of mine to play out the demo. Thank you for watching.
That's all we're gonna do.